Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Gravel Ride podcast. I'm your host, Craig Dalton. I hope everybody is as healthy as can be and has been able to get out there and pedal, whether it's indoor on a trainer or optimally out there in the gravel. This week's episode is again being brought to you by our friends at Cycle Oregon. You can visit them at cycleoregon.com. You may recall me talking about their gravel weekend, which is now going to be happening October 9th through 11th. But they also have a 7-day classic tour, which includes both paved and gravel roads in September of this year. Like many of the event organizers, and particularly those in the nonprofit sector like Cycle Oregon, we're really counting on you showing up this fall and spreading the love across as many events as possible to keep these rides coming year after year after year. Cycle Oregon's been supporting cyclists in the Pacific Northwest since 1988 and has had a huge run and a huge impact in keeping spaces open to cyclists and improving upon them. So feel free to give them a look at cycleoregon.com. Make sure if you're looking for event details to mention the letters TGR for the gravel ride to let them know you heard about them here. So this week we've got another pre-recorded interview with an event organizer. So keep in mind this was recorded prior to the pandemic really kicking off. So things may change and some of the things we say may not make sense for this exact moment in time. But we've got another great event organizer. We've got Dean Stanton from up in Canada in British Columbia, who organizes the Triple Crown of Gravel, which includes the Sea to Sky Gravel Fondo, the Cowacan Crusher, and Kettle Metal. I know Sea to Sky has already been moved to the end of the year in October, quickly following after Kettle Metal. The Crusher is still scheduled for June, but keep an eye on the website because that may change as well. I hope, like me, many of you are dreaming about these fall events and trying to squeeze as many of them in as possible. I know these event organizers are all scrambling to make sure that they can remain solvent and have events in future years. So with that, let's dive right into our conversation with Dean. Dean, welcome to the show.
Great. Thanks. Good to be here.
Yeah, I'm really excited to have you on the show. I know you're producing 3 events at least up there this year in the gravel community. But first, we always like to get started by learning a little bit more about your background as a cyclist and how ultimately you got into the arduous task of event production.
Well, it's a weird and twisted past for that. I started off mainly in triathlons in high school and became an elite professional from 87 to 99. And before I sort of quit racing, I got into coaching at about 97. And then about 2004, I thought, hey, I've done all these races and helped out and done all this. I'll put on a triathlon. And I had no idea what I was doing. And to be honest, shouldn't have been putting one on, but did it and sort of went through that and did a bunch of triathlons and then some running races. And then I've always really wanted to put on a bike race and some bike races. And then, at that time, around 2009, 2010, the Grand Fondos were sort of taking off. And then when I looked at the cost of production and everything, I was just like, no, this isn't going to work. So 2013, I was looking at, what was going on down in the States, and already, Dirty Kansas was on the radar, and I was like, that's pretty cool. So I went down and did one in the race in the States on a cross bike and started riding more gravel that year anyways, and then said, you know what, I'm going to put on the Kettle Metal, and we did, and like 80 people showed up or something. It was very good, and, in terms of numbers, but, it was great, and everybody really enjoyed it, and I myself ride gravel a lot because I really enjoy not having the cars and being more in nature. It's kind of a hybrid between, say, road riding and mountain biking because I think you need some of the mountain bike skills. It helps, but it's just, but it's a little bit more easier than mountain biking in some respects in terms of the descending, and the ascents aren't nearly as steep usually. But anyways, I really enjoy it. It's something I've really do more and more of now.
Nice. And was that first Kettle Metal, was that back in 2014 then?
Correct. Yeah.
I'm curious, you made mention, and I like to have takeaways for other event organizers. You made mention that you thought the cost of production of a Grand Fondo on the road was more expensive than a gravel event. Was that from some sort of practical perspective, like road closures and things like that?
Well, I'm not sure how things work in the States, but in Canada, they seem to love, having everything done to the nth degree. So, yeah, it's traffic management plans, police, traffic control people. It's prohibitively expensive to a degree to shut any roads down, and it gets very, very expensive very fast.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, so that's sort of why I was like, no, I'm not doing that. Yeah.
So you're there in the heartbed of mountain biking up in British Columbia. So that first event was the Kettle Medal, and I know at this point you've expanded to having 3 gravel events on the calendar. Is that right?
Correct. I sort of and that's funny because that sort of grew organically as well. Is that I did Kettle Medal for a couple years, and then I looked on the island, and I was over there anyways, Vancouver Island, which is a pretty big island, and I just was like, I'm going to go and check out some gravel rides, and I realized that there was a old railway line there as well, and then just worked into an event over there as well, and we're going now into our 4th year for the Cowichan Crusher, which is out of Lake Cowichan, it's phenomenal. Some of the riding on the island is, I think, some of the best riding in terms of gravel in BC. I mean, unfortunately, most of it seems to be on private property, but yeah, it's really good riding over there. Yeah.
And are you able to get permission for the event day to get on that private property?
Yeah, it's just a few more steps to go through. But yeah, no, it's really good stuff over there. It's really nice. I mean, one of the challenges in BC, and I'm not sure you have this in California or other places, is a lot of the terrain is very steep. So it's very difficult at times to find a sort of circular route on gravel. A lot of them are sort of like roots of trees, in that there's a main road, and then it'll go off and branch up a super steep road, and it'll be dead end, and then you got to come down and you got to go. So the nice thing about Vancouver Island is it's a lot less steep terrain, so there's a lot more sort of roads that all link up. Whereas other places like Squamish, it's a little bit more difficult, and again, most of the roads are all built for logging and logging access, so they're forest service roads. So
yeah, no, I think that's common for any coastal areas. Certainly in my neck of the woods, you can't go 10 miles without going 1,000 feet of climbing, and you got to pick your routes wisely.
Yeah. So and I mean, I've done some of the rides, and I'm just amazed at how these trucks were getting up and down these hills with logs, like a load of logs. I'm just like, it blows me away, because I'm like, this is so steep.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the third event is called what?
Well, the third event we did for 2 years was the Golden Ears Gravel Fondo, which was a bit challenging in that one of the cool areas about Pitt Meadows is near to the Tri-City area of lower mainland of Vancouver, Greater Vancouver, and it has all these dikes, and technically a lot of that area is underwater, like under sea level, but they have all these dikes that you kind of link up. It became very difficult to try and go through the permitting process on that, because I had either 9 or 10 jurisdictions I had to go through, and then I'm doing Squamish and I have 4 or 3. It's so much easier. So I just kind of went, it's good riding and good training, but trying to put an event on there was really challenging. And so over the last year and a half, I was going up to Squamish to do some gravel rides, and I just said, you know what, we're just going to move it next year. And that's what we're doing right now, and the numbers are pretty strong, and we're pretty excited about it. So yeah. Great.
And that one's called Sea to Sky, is that right?
Yeah, So I got that name from basically the Sea to Sky Highway, but that's called the Sea to Sky Corridor. It's kind of like, it's pretty steep terrain, and I'm not really sure even how they made that road way back in the 50s from Vancouver to Squamish to Whistler. And Whistler's like a world-class resort, skiing, but it's also major mountain biking, downhilling in the summer. But that road is just like, trying to remember the name. There's that marathon on the Pacific coast of California that goes through the redwoods and all that stuff, and it's kind of similar to that. It's very steep terrain.
Yeah, I've been through on the way to Whistler previous times, and actually up on some fire roads in Squamish, but I was up in a van with a full suspension bike and a full face helmet ready to go downhill.
Yeah, so very different.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I want to get into some of the details in terms of elevation and the type of terrain for the 3 different events. But one of the things that jumped out at me on the website was you actually have divisions for 2 and 4 person teams, which I haven't seen in a lot of gravel events. Can you talk about, how that works from a practical perspective and, what your intention was in adding those event categories?
Well, I kind of really like the team atmosphere, and then I also thought it would be interesting for people to bring out other buddies and friends to do their event with them instead of just all doing it singly. So I thought it'd be really cool to sort of do a team of 2 or team of 4, mixed or whatever, and then you give them a slight discount so that, you're encouraging more teams. And, we give out, prizes to the top team of 2, top team of 4. Then we also have a triple crown prizing for all 3 events, the end of the season at the last event. And I just really like the idea of it. It's funny that I sort of did that second or third year, and we've been doing it ever since. And I guess now that you mention it, well, I haven't seen this at a lot of other events. So.
Yeah, I think it's. Yeah. I think it's a very interesting dynamic, both from a race organizer's perspective. Obviously, it encourages people very specifically to bring a buddy with them, but also from a racing perspective, having done team events in the past myself, both single day and multi-day, it does add a different dynamic because you're trying to get your teammate across as fast as you can, and you're going to have different skill sets. So I imagine in a gravel event, you may have someone who's a good roller on the flat terrain, really coming to the front and dragging their teammate along, whereas, their teammate may have other skill sets. So it does, I think, create some interesting mentality during the race, which is probably quite fun to race as a team.
Yeah, that's just what we're trying to encourage is just more people to come out, more people to do it as a team. It's combined times, so it's like 2 people would be the 2 times together, and that's so thus it doesn't make sense for one person to be super fast and the other person takes longer, because you're adding the times together anyways for the results. So you might as well just try and, like you said, both ride together and cheer each other on and push each other for a better finish.
And you mentioned it casually that you've kind of cast the 3 events under this nomiker of the Triple Crown of Gravel, and you're actually tracking results across 3 events and providing, accolades or awards at the end of all 3 events, right?
Yep, that's correct. Yeah.
Yeah, pretty cool. So let's get into some of the terrain in each of the 3 events, and curious to kind of get your perspective if you would expect, given unlimited resources, if people would change bikes or tires or different things about the bikes between the 3 events, or if it's similar enough that it's kind of run the same tires in each event.
In terms of the terrain, it's quite different. As I said before, Squamish is somewhat flat. It's got some hills in it, but nothing major. However, the long course, the full fondo, which we're in kilometers up here, is about 100 kilometers. Also because it's in April 25th, and I don't think people are hoping to do 150, 200 kilometers fairly early in the season. So I'm trying to make sure it's not too long for people. It's challenging, but not over challenging. But there's definitely some climbs as you get closer to the turnaround area. And the gravel is mostly fairly hard pack. And similar to the island, but Kettle Metal has a couple of sections where it's a bit sandy or softer. So I would suggest going with a slightly wider tire with lower pressures for that one. Although, it really depends, right? It depends how big you are, how much you weigh, what kind of bike you're riding. It's interesting. We've started tracking with our registration what people are doing, what their bikes they're riding, what size tires they're riding. These are all questions we ask at registration, and sort of have tracked that last year and have a lot of interesting stats on. When we first started this 7 years ago, I didn't have the stats, but through seeing what people were doing, the vast majority were on mountain bikes, and then there was a few on cross bikes, and 7 years ago there wasn't even gravel bikes, so it was mostly that, and now the vast majority are 700C bikes split between, gravel and cyclocross. And then there's 650B gravel bikes, but there's not as many. Like, I would say on our stats, over 75% are gravel or 700C, and less than 25% are 650B. And then one of the other interesting things about mountain biking is we thought there'd be a lot more people on 29ers, and there's hardly any. It's only like 4.5% of the 27% that are mountain bikes. The vast majority are 26-inch or 650B.
And are you tracking the tire width that people are proposing they're going to ride on?
Yeah. We asked them, is it 26-inch, 650B, 29-incher, and then hybrid bikes. We just assume that's 700C in road bikes. So we have about 4% road bikes who try and attempt it on that, even though on a lot of them you're very limited on what size you can go. And then hybrid bikes, you can usually get a bit, wider. Most of the people on hybrid bikes and mountain bikes are usually doing the 50K or the medium size fondos. And as the longer distances, most of them are on cross bikes and gravel bikes, and then there's a few on mountain bikes.
Yeah. I wouldn't be surprised if your proportions of 700C versus 650B being 75-25% are pretty common around the country. I find that 650, it's a little bit out of the norm. It's certainly not the majority of what I see as well. So that's not too surprising over there.
Mm-hmm. And the other thing is I've noticed that it seemed like there's a tendency for people to go with 1x instead of 2x, but I've noticed that most of the people in our long course on gravel are all on 2x instead of 1x, and it seems like more 650B have 1x, and most of the 700C are 2x, but I mean, it's sort of open on that.
Yeah, no, I think you're probably right. I think the 650B wheel set probably is attractive to someone who has experience mountain biking. Therefore, they probably have experience running 1x. So it kind of tracks and correlates together, I would imagine.
Yeah, I mean, the thing I've noticed riding my gravel bike as opposed to my mountain bike, and which is just that if you're on a 1x, I feel like you're going to run out of gears a bit in certain places on some of our courses, because you're not going to have those tighter steps, but also the ability to go into a big chain ring and just go a bit faster on some of the downhills if that's what you want to do. But it just seems a bit limiting to me. But
yeah, it's always a personal choice here in the gravel world for sure.
Yeah.
So, Dean, can you let us know what the dates are for each event and when registration's open?
Okay. Well, registration's all open for all of them as of right now. They've all been open as of early December. Start off the first one, Sea to Sky Gravel Fondo is on Saturday, April 25th, and it's in Squamish Valley. And the next one is the Cowichan Crusher on June 7th on Vancouver Island and Lake Cowichan. And the third one of the Triple Crown is the Kettle Metal on September 26th, Penticton to Kelowna. Yeah, the logistics on that one is a bit interesting in terms of all my other events is sort of same start finish. That one, to be honest, the first year or two was a bit of a logistical nightmare trying to figure out how to have a start and finish in two different locations that are, 80 kilometers, 100 kilometers apart, and having to bus people and truck people and truck all the bicycles. And yeah, that was a bit challenging, but we've kind of got it pretty well sorted now. But yeah, that was trying to figure out, people had to check in on the Friday to load their bikes into the, semi-trailer to drive it down Friday night so that we unload Saturday morning so they can start the race. Because we didn't want to load and unload in the morning. It's too much time consuming. So it's easier just to unload, get on their bikes, and then we shuttle people from Penticton to start to the people doing the medio to Shoot Lake, and then from Shoot Lake they ride down. And that I don't know if you've ever been to Penticton or Kelowna, the interior, but it's kind of an interesting area, and that you think of BC and you think of monster trees and all that kind of stuff, but it's very different. It's kind of like Napa Valley North in a way. But more different because it's got really big lakes and like huge lakes. It's got very dry, warm terrain. There's orchards, there's wineries, There's this old train, so it's very scenic, very beautiful, and it's interesting.
Yeah, Penticton's gorgeous. I have been up there for Ironman many years ago, and it's certainly a place where you could bring your family up for a vacation, and everybody in the household is going to find something to do. It's great. As you said, the lakes are amazing, and the mountains have a slightly different character than other parts of BC. So I'm not surprised it's a popular event for you.
Yeah, and I mean that was our inception, first event. But I feel like it's just a really awesome way to end this season for us for our Triple Crown, and it's just we had a lot of people in from Alberta because it gets colder there earlier than Vancouver and BC, and they're sort of ending their season in September, late September. So it's kind of a good sort of end of finish for us.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, I'll make sure to put a link in the show notes to the registration site and make sure people take a look at that. And I wish you the best of luck this season. I can't wait to hear more about it at the end of the year.
Great. Okay, thank you.
Big thanks to Dean for coming on the show. I'm hopeful that the Triple Crown of Gravel will be able to run all 3 events this year. Definitely get out there and support them if you're in that neck of the woods up there in British Columbia. As you continue to weather this pandemic, I hope that everybody's being as good as possible to themselves and their loved ones and their community. We all need to come together to get through this. The gravel community has been strong and super supportive across the board, whether it's online or seeing those who are fortunate enough to ride outside, riding alone and keeping distance from one another. I know we're all wanting to get back to group rides and getting together, but now's not the time. Let's stay solo and let's stay safe out there. Like many of you out there, I've lost my full-time employment, so I guess I'm a full-time podcaster. I only wish that paid the rent. If you want to support the podcast, you can visit me at buymeacoffee.com/thegravelride. Appreciate any of your support for the overhead we incur here at the Gravel Ride. As always, I want to hear from you over social media or directly via email at craig@thegravelride.bike. And finally, a big thank you to our sponsor, Cycle Oregon. They certainly had the option of pulling the sponsorship as they move their dates to later in the year. But Cycle Oregon really wants to connect with the gravel community and is looking at this long term. So they've agreed to continue to support the podcast, which I truly appreciate. So definitely give them a look at cycleoregon.com. Until next time, here's to finding some dirt under your wheels.